everyone, I'm Matt Ford, and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. Drones are all over the news as hundreds of these airborne vehicles, some reportedly as large as cars, hover above towns, critical infrastructure, and military bases in New Jersey and elsewhere. The Biden administration, sparking concern from residents and outrage from state and local officials, has explained them away as misidentified aircraft or drones operated by the public or law enforcement. The White House has characterized these events as new, something they want to investigate, get to the bottom of, something that has never happened before. Today, Matthew Phelan, Chris Sharp, and I released a bombshell story in the Daily Mail. In it, we interviewed Chris Grooms, a former deputy of Valley County, Nebraska, and former chief of police of Ord, Nebraska. Grooms, who was a deputy at the time, details how hundreds of drones swarmed the county and a small town of Ord in December 2019 and January 2020. The descriptions of these drones and their behavior 4 years ago are frighteningly similar to what is being reported on the East Coast of the United States. Chief Grooms' claims are backed up by written testimony from residents and over 100 911 calls and police reports. Last month, I interviewed Chief Grooms on the Good Trouble Show. What you're about to hear is shocking, as it makes clear this is nothing new and that the Biden administration is gaslighting all of us about what it truly knows is flying in our skies that they cannot protect. Today's guest is a U.S. Army Airborne Infantry veteran who is now serving his country as a law enforcement professional. As a sheriff's deputy for Valley County, Nebraska, he was the department's sniper and firearms instructor. He is currently the chief of police for Ord, Nebraska. Please welcome Police Chief Chris Grooms. Chief Grooms, how are you, sir?
Good. Yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you, firstly, for your service to this nation and your continued service to your country.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We have spoken previously. We had a fairly long discussion about what you're about to go into, and firstly, how is it in Nebraska? Is it getting cold yet?
Oh yeah, it's starting to. No snow, but it's coming.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been cooling off finally here in LA, but yeah, nothing like Nebraska. So tell us about the city. Tell us about Valley County and the city of Ord. What is it like? How big is it? What's the population like there?
Sure. Population-wise, for the entire county's getting close to about 5,000 people. And then the county seat for Valley County is Ord, where I currently work. And it's a town of about 2,100 people. And that includes from farmers, ranchers, business owners, law enforcement, firefighters. We have a pretty good sized hospital, so we stay pretty active. The town's full of nice people. But what they experienced that we're going to talk about is, to this day, still bothers them.
What is the law enforcement footprint in Ord County? So the sheriff's department and your police department and any other city police departments. Like, what would you say, like on average, or just a rough estimate of the number of law enforcement officials that are in Ord County?
Yeah. So for the county, which is Valley, it's about 7 total law enforcement officers for the county. And then for the city, at the time when all these things were occurring, it was about 3 to 4 officers within the city of Ord. And then occasionally we would have state patrolmen, the Nebraska State Patrol, which usually was 2 to 3. So in whole, I would say anywhere between 9 and 12 on any given day.
And are there any military installations or nuclear facilities in or around the county?
No, not near the county. You'd have to go about an hour south of Valley County just to get to a National Guard facility.
And what kind of air traffic is in the vicinity? Is there a regional airport or a major airport? Like, what on an average night would you see helicopters flying around or anything like that?
Yeah, we occasionally have the National Guard flying up here, Chinooks, Blackhawks, just your typical flyover county with the big planes headed towards Omaha or Lincoln, Nebraska, or en route to Denver, somewhere around there. But we do have a lot of crop dusters and little planes that do a lot of stuff for the farmers. So we do have a little bit of plane activity.
And Chief Grooms, like in the evening, is there much in the way of air traffic or any low altitude air traffic?
No, not really. No.
Okay. And in terms of airport, you don't have like a big regional carrier or anything close to the county what is it? The county again? Valley County.
Yep, Valley County. Yep. Here in Ord, we do have an airport, and we have had some landings by Chinooks and Blackhawks. But typically, any planes that come land here are your small prop planes, your crop dusters, that type of stuff.
Now, Chief Grooms, on an average night, how quiet is it? Is there much in the way of cars or airplanes, high altitude airplanes going over? Like, how quiet is it? Are we just hearing coyotes and wildlife, or is there a lot of activity?
No, your typical night by 9:30, 10 o'clock, everybody's in home, getting ready for school or work the next day. So you don't typically see a lot of vehicle traffic past 10 p.m. Air travel, we do have a lot of flyover planes coming from the big cities, but that's from, sun up to sundown. So that's pretty typical. It's
not like you have a jet, a commercial jet flying at, say, like 5,000 feet or anything lower. It's just occasional military traffic. But would you say in the evening it is rare to have any kind of military air traffic?
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty rare out this way. Yep.
Understood. What is the closest military base to your city?
So military base for full-time active duty guys would probably be Offutt Air Force Base, which is about 3.5 hours southeast of where I'm currently located here in Ord.
And why did you decide to reach out to me?
Well, ever since this stuff happened back in 2019, late 2019, early 2020, it became pretty concerning, just some of the activity that we were having from witnesses calling 911, ranchers mentioning things about their cattle and horses kind of being harassed. It was just real unusual activity that we would see from drones. And we obviously don't have a lot of drone activity around here to start with. So all this that went down at that time when I was with the sheriff's office, we were reaching out to the State Patrol, National Guard, FBI, Offutt Air Force Base, and we weren't getting any feedback. They didn't really seem that they knew what it was. I'm not saying they didn't, but it just seemed that way. They were very respectful and whatnot, but as far as getting back to us and wanting to, let us know what it was, they were very hesitant on that.
So, Chief Grooms, to the best of your ability, please walk us through this, these series of events. And this was in 2020, correct? Or was it just before 2020?
Just before 2020. We started seeing news reports coming out of Colorado of these things late 2019. And then unannounced to us, they're over the top of us. And we started getting 911 calls from, witnesses coming home from work or going to work, people just outside minding their own business. Just tons of 911 calls coming from ranchers even. Hey, there's these things flying around in my pasture. To a certain point, it got to, hey, these things are harassing my horses. So we started getting pretty serious with it when we were getting 911 call after 911 call for two weeks straight.
And during these 911 calls, were people fearful of what they were seeing, or did they think it was, some kid with a drone harassing their cattle? What was the sort of tenor or the sort of emotion that you would hear or the dispatcher would hear in these calls?
Yeah, I would say at the beginning it was kind of a, oh, look, these things are in the sky, he, ha ha ha. And then after the first couple nights, it started turning into, hey, what are these things? What is going on? How come nobody knows anything? Why isn't the larger elements of law enforcement out here? And then it started becoming concerning for the local populace.
So you receive 911 calls, and you guys are dispatched to locations. How did all of that happen?
Yeah, well, once a call would come into our regional dispatch center, they would pass it along to whoever was on duty, which a lot of the nights it was me and another deputy or our sheriff or the local PD officer. And if the call was in town, it went to the PD, and if they requested our assistance through the sheriff's office, we would go help. But if they were out in the county, it would come back to us at the sheriff's office, and we would essentially get as much information as we could from the dispatch through the witness, and then we would head that direction. And typically the calls would come through and you would say, yeah, okay, sure, they're seeing 20 of these things. No, okay, whatever. And then, yep, we'd get there and there they were, just making no sense to us on patterns and why they were even here.
So you would go to these 911 calls, you would drive out there in your patrol vehicle, and you would see these things. Describe what, on your first response making contact with whoever was reporting these things, you drive up, it's at night, what do you see?
Well, the first actual recall that I saw these on a personal level, not only was I on duty, but it came from my actual sheriff. And he had called me directly and said, hey, bro, you got to get out here. And, we had a call on this stuff. I'm here. I'm trying to pursue it. But if you can come out and help me, I'd appreciate it. And, I was out the door. So as I was driving in a southerly direction down Highway 11, I could see some flashing lights off in the distance. And I ended up calling my sheriff back saying, yeah, I see it. I see it. I'm coming to your location. And this thing would not let us get close enough to it. I mean, it just continued to move away as we would try and approach it, but it wasn't very high in the air, maybe 60 feet at the highest level. The one thing that we found to be very weird about it was it stayed near the roads. It paralleled the roads as we approached it. So no matter how much we got close to it, it would move away, but it would stay near the roads to where we could continue to pursue it. It was almost like it was messing with us.
Were you going to someone's house or residence?
I don't know exactly what the call came into the sheriff was, other than, hey, these things are out here again tonight. What's going on? And that's the sheriff, being a good sheriff, he went to go take a look at it.
Okay, so the sheriff calls you out to respond to this call. Were you responding to a place of residence?
No, I assume from what the sheriff had told me is that somebody was just coming into town and saw him, and we had reports at that time the nights prior, so it was getting to the point where we were responding to him no matter what the situation was. So I assume the call came to the sheriff, and he went to go do his due diligence, and there they were. So he called me out to help him.
So you drive up and you see what as you're approaching?
Yeah, as I'm approaching, and I'm probably maybe about 400 yards away from it, because I could see my sheriff's vehicle, to my south, and that thing was to the southwest of his vehicle. So it was probably about 400 yards from me, approximately 60 feet in the air, and I just saw lights. It looked pretty large. So I continued to go towards him, and I let him know, yep, I have eyes on. But the funny thing is as we approached it, it would move away from us. And, we noticed that as it was moving away from us, it would stay parallel to the roads, and it would parallel the roads. So it was almost like it was toying with us. It didn't want us to see it fully, but it still wanted to let us know, hey, I'm here, come get me, And eventually as we continued to pursue it down some gravel roads, it moved off in one direction. We couldn't pursue it no more because we had come to a dead end. And it seemed to disappear almost. I don't know if it shut its lights off or what, which is illegal. But I assume it either shut its lights off or it just shot straight up in the air, but it disappeared. We couldn't track it no more with our own eyes.
So, Chief Grooms, describe the lights. What did they look like? Did they flash? Did they look like a normal, like, sort of aircraft light, an aircraft position light? Were they brighter than normal, dimmer than normal? Was there anything unique about them?
Well, I can certainly tell you that they were not FAA approved or regulated by any means. Sometimes when we would interact with these things, it would just be a solid light. Sometimes there were multiple blinking lights. It from call to call, it varied. And there was other times where, like I had said earlier, it would almost be like they would disappear or they would turn their lights off.
And when you were approaching these lights, did you have your light bar on?
I did not have my overheads on, no. And we had our regular, dims and brights on as we were traversing the gravel road, but we didn't have a searchlight on. We didn't have our overhead emergency lights on or anything like that.
And when you, at any point during this response, did you stop your patrol vehicle?
Yeah, when we come to some of the intersections, we, kind of made a plan like, hey, you go this route and I'll go this route and see if we can't intercept this thing, coming from two different angles. And it just didn't matter. It knew where we were at. It knew what we were doing. We just couldn't get close enough to it to identify its actual size or what it actually looked like.
Would you roll down your window to listen to it, to see if there was any noise?
Yeah. On numerous occasions, we would roll down our windows just to see if we could hear, propellers or a hum or, a turbine or something like that.
Was there any interference that you had with your police radio or your vehicle?
Nope. As far as I know it, within my department, we never had any communication problems, whether through radio or even talking on our cell phones.
So you respond to that call with the sheriff. What was your next encounter with these things?
Well, it would have probably been within about a week. I mean, obviously it's been a while, so trying to remember it as close as I can. Sure. I'd say it was about a week later. I was actually at home, and again, the sheriff had called me and said, hey man, I'm currently busy. There's a lot of drone interaction down south of North Loop, which is in my county, and Scotia, which is to the southeast of my county. They don't have a good law enforcement presence over there, so we help over there as much as we can. And they were having 911 calls about, hey, there's drones basically circling the town. So it was kind of scaring people, so they were calling. And my sheriff asked me if I could fly down there. So I hopped in my patrol vehicle and headed that way. And it's about a 12, 13 mile drive from where I was at to Scotia. And I happened to come down eastward down Highway 22. And in order to go into Scotia, you have to turn and head south down Highway 11. So I had to come to the junction of Highway 22 and Highway 11. And as I stopped at the junction to turn to head south, I happened to look left. And when I looked left, North Loop, which would be to my left about 3/4 of a mile, there's a giant co-op building, and that co-op building has a big red light on top of it. And I would say it's anywhere between 100 to 150 feet high. And I happened to just see to the east of the red co-op light another large orangish reddish light. And of course I'm going, well, that's not the co-op building. So I looked right real quick to check my other direction of travel, and I looked back left again, and that thing had covered close to 3/4 of a mile in 2 to 3 seconds. And I was kind of stunned because I'm pretty familiar with aircraft and whatnot from my military experience. And I couldn't believe it that something that could travel that fast without no noise. And I didn't have my window up at that time. And my vehicle was running, obviously. And at that time I drove a Ram 1500 pickup truck, but at that low of altitude and it to be able to cover that distance, there should have been an ample amount of noise, and there was nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing that you would think would make a sound from a drone, even. No prop wash, none of that noise. It was completely silent. Yes, it was dark, but it was stunning. It blew my mind. And when it flew past me or flew right in front of my windshield, it was still that brightish orange red color. I couldn't make out if it had, wings or a tail or any of that stuff, or if it had windows. I couldn't see none of that. It was just a bright orangish color. And the one thing that I thought was weird, as it went by me at that speed, there was contrails behind it. So I didn't know how to regulate that am I looking at a plane? What is this? But at the same time, I'm like, hey, I got to get to Scotia because of all the people that are freaking out over there. So I turned and headed south down Highway 11 to continue towards Scotia. And this thing was gone. I mean, it was gone. The horizon, the hilltops, I have no idea where it went. Like that, and it was gone. So as I turned into Scotia, there's a bridge that you have to cross, and it's the North Loop River right there. Well, I stopped at the river to try and get out of my truck and get a little bit higher up on my truck to see if maybe I could see something. And by that time, somebody had come pulling up next to me in their vehicle, and it had a couple people in it that I know them. They're good folks, and they were actually going into Scotia because they're on the volunteer fire department, and they were actually going over to look what was going on in Scotia because they were hearing the radio chatter. So they jumped out, and I just looked at them. I said, please tell me you guys saw that. And they said, yep. Oh yeah, we saw it. But, that night I didn't really think about all of that, of what took place, because I was still trying to let it register in my mind. But within a few days, as I was recollecting everything, I just started thinking how weird it was that the minute this large, brightish orange looking thing flew by me at just crazy speeds with no sound. And then as I'm pulling into Scotia, all of these supposed littler ones that were on the outskirts of Scotia, essentially harassing the town and making people freak out, they disappeared. They were gone. The minute the big looking thing took off, these things left Scotia, and the rest of the night we had no more 911 calls or anything about it. It was weird.
When your vehicle was stopped and you saw this big orb of light, what would be the size you would estimate it to be?
I would say it was easily the size of my Ram 1500 pickup truck, and I'm driving, the crew cab, so it had the 4 doors. It's a pretty good sized truck.
And when this thing, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if people want an idea of the size of that, they're fairly big, the Ram 1500. So I would say it was easily the equivalent size of that.
And this again was around 50 to 60 feet above the ground?
No, that night, I would say it was closer to that 100, 150 feet up, just because it was flying pretty close to the same level as the co-op tower was.
And what would you estimate its distance was from you to the object?
Well, when it flew out in front of me, I would say that it was probably within, throwing distance of a football or something like that. But as far as at its height level, it was probably 150, 100 feet.
Did you notice if it illuminated the surrounding terrain, illuminated, the ground near your vehicle. Was there anything odd about that, or did it behave like any large light source would have at that distance?
No, from what I recollect, it wasn't lighting up anything on the ground. And I mean, I could have missed that because I'm just like, holy cow, what is this thing? But the light is odd. I don't understand how that light was like that. And there was no noise. And then the contrails, which typically you see from a jet, but it's just odd. That's all I can say about that night. It was so weird.
And in terms of like, when you say like there's something odd about the light that it was emanating, was it the color or how it looked to your eye? Like what feels odd or what felt odd about it, if you think back?
I mean, that night it was just bright, but there was nothing else to it. There wasn't flashes. It wasn't blinking. It was just bright, but it wasn't directional, I guess, if that's a correct word to use. It wasn't directional, as in it wasn't in front of it. It wasn't shining off to the sides. It was just there. The light was just there.
Did it look like looking at, say, like a welding arc, like that kind of intensity, or easier on your eyes?
That's a pretty good way to put it. It was bright. I mean, I obviously I could look at it. It wasn't hurting my eyes, but it was just a big bright light, and there was no direction, like my headlights point forward when I'm going down the road. It wasn't like that at all.
So this particular light, so it was incredibly intense, like a welding light or welding arc, like looking at a welding arc. Did you have to shield your eyes or anything when you looked at it?
No, I didn't have to shield my eyes or nothing. It wasn't that bright, and perhaps it just could have been because I was at a distance from it. So as far as it was blinding me or anything like that, no.
The following day, when you're thinking about this, were you trying to think, was this an airplane, or were you beginning to recognize that this was likely something that may not have had a human origin?
I obviously was thinking a lot of things.
Sure.
Because I wanted to know what it was, and having my military background and knowing how, an operation works and mission planning and stuff like that, it just didn't make sense if it was us, if it was our military or even a private company doing stuff. Why are they near small town Nebraska? Why are they flying around small towns? It just didn't make sense. So at that point, that's when we started making our phone calls, trying to figure out, hey, is this Air Force? Is this a private company? And yeah, I started thinking, maybe this isn't from planet Earth, or, isn't China or Russia or even us. I started to think about a lot of things.
What was the reaction from the sheriff? Did you go into the sheriff's department the following day and he's on his office on his phone? How was the sheriff handling all of this?
Yeah. Well, I'll just back up a little bit if that's all right.
Please.
So that night, when myself and a few other people on the bridge had witnessed that thing, I did call the sheriff pretty quickly after that interaction happened, and started to kind of make the comment that, you're not going to believe this, and as soon as I got out the word but, pardon my French, but he said, no shit, you saw it too. And it made sense because where he lived at the time, that thing probably would have flew directly over him, if not near his residence. So he saw it too. And at that point, it started to really concern him because he's an intelligent guy. He's been in law enforcement a while. He knows that that's not normal activity, by even if it was drones, just for what was going on. It served no purpose. So yeah, the next morning when I come into work to basically start making phone calls, he was already in the office, and he had 2-3 phones just near his face, calling people, trying to figure out who this could be or what it could be.
Who again was the sheriff specifically calling regarding these events?
Well, that morning, I know he had relayed to me that he was in contact with Offutt Air Force Base. I don't know the exact name of the HR person that he was on the phone with, but they basically gave him it's not us. It's not the Air Force. We're not doing that type of activity. We contacted the Nebraska State Patrol. They don't have that technology. They weren't up here doing things like that. I did call down to the National Guard out of Grand Island, and they weren't doing anything like that up here. So pretty much everybody that we talked to gave us the no, that's not us, and essentially, we don't know at this time what it is either.
Following these calls, was there any follow-up from, FBI or FAA or any of these other agencies? Like, did they call a week later and say, hey, are these things still flying around, or was it radio silence from those federal agencies?
Yeah, we never really got a call back or a follow-up or anything from anybody.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, please.
I was just going to say the people that I did have follow-ups from were people like Christopher Mellon. He seemed pretty concerned. I had a long conversation with him. We were on the phone for probably about an hour. He was very concerned. He clearly was finding this to be very concerning. I was in contact with a reporter from the New York Times. I guess maybe you don't want me to say her name, but she actually followed up with me numerous times, and she seemed pretty concerned and would like to get to the bottom of it. I spoke to a journalist out of Colorado who was a journalist for the DOD, and him and I had conversations over the phone and emails and whatnot. And yeah, he pretty much was giving me the same gist of everything as, it's not us. We don't know what it is. And he actually did an actual article on these things. And the article basically read just as he was telling me that, we don't know what it is.
I want to go back again to one of the nights, or any of the nights. We'll say perhaps one of the nights that had the most volume of radio calls. 911 calls. What was the radio traffic like between officers? Was it, I guess what I'm asking, was it like more than one officer responding to a call? Was there much sort of tactical communication between officers during one of the busiest events?
Yeah, there was communication between us as, hey, you try and go down this road and we'll try and, intercept it from different angles, to, hey, go over here and set up on this high point with your binoculars while we try and maneuver on these things with our vehicles. So there was coordination to the best that we could do with what we had.
The communications from the other officers, like, when I listen to you, Chief Grooms, you're, very calm, very matter of fact. Did you sense any fear in any of the other officers, or like panic or anything like that, or was it just, very sort of matter of fact, don't know what these things are?
I think it was a mixture of everything. I mean, towards the end, it not only was becoming an annoyance because we just couldn't catch them. We couldn't figure out what they were. Nobody was telling us anything. But also, we don't want our community to be worrying about this stuff as much as they were at the beginning. But we also didn't want accidents out on the highways when people were trying to find these things themselves and, running across the highways and running stop signs. And I'm not saying they were doing that, but that is one thing that we were concerned about was, are our accidents going to go up because there's so many people out? So there was concern at a lot of different levels. Not only these things being in our county, messing around with ranchers, cattle and whatnot, but just also other people's safety. from staying out of accidents and things like that.
I want to talk a little bit about the interaction of these drones with cattle. Describe if you can, in detail what those interactions were like, how many of them were there, what was the reaction from the ranchers of these things?
Towards the end of it, when we couldn't figure out what they were and what they were doing here, we were, this is Nebraska, so we were starting to get those answers from the ranchers about if these things keep messing, with my horses and I got to go round up my cattle every morning. It was pretty much coming down to, well, if the government's not going to look into it and do anything, we're just going to try and shoot them down. And, we're sitting there saying, hold on, let's not go to that yet. Let's, continue. But I understood where they were coming from. That's their livelihood. That's their property. So I understood that side of it. But as far as when these things would show up, I received a phone call one night from a rancher, and he had stated to me, these things are essentially lighting up his pastures with lights, almost like a searchlight or something like that. And it was starting to really bug him because it was making his animals move away from where he had left them. And, he'd have to go out at 4 or 5 in the morning and round them all up and get accountability of everything. And it just became a nuisance. But yeah, he had made the comment that whatever these things were, they had lit up his cattle and he could see it doing it. And it made him irritated. So he went out to go try and, chase it off or whatever he thought he was going to do. But it just took off. It just left. It's almost like it knew it was coming.
The description from the ranchers of these things, did any of the description of these vehicles match, or these airborne vehicles, did any of them match what you had seen or any of the other officers had seen? And did the rancher report any sounds like a helicopter or anything like that?
Yeah, it was typically the same thing that we experienced at our level with the no noise. Sometimes it was blinking lights, sometimes it was a solid looking light. And like I said, it just was starting to really irritate people that there was nothing we could do about it. And it seemed like the government either knew what it was or they just didn't know what it was. So they were shunning it off, hoping it would just go away. I don't know what they were thinking, but that's what it seemed like.
Did the ranchers describe any kind of rotor wash or, if these things were low to the ground and shining a spotlight on these things, did the ranchers see any blowing dust or anything like that? And again, I live here in Los Angeles, so I don't have any experience with cattle, but it would seem to me that just a spotlight wouldn't be enough to make cattle run, or would it? Would a spotlight make them run, or was there any sort of wind disturbance that was reported during these interactions with the cattle?
As far as the noise and the dust, I never got to asking a whole lot about that. I know that at one point he made the comment there was no noise, but it could have been due to the fact he couldn't get close enough to it. But as far as dust kicking up or anything like that, I never asked him about that. And then with the spotlights, sometimes cattle, they might think it's their actual handlers and they'll move towards those lights, thinking that they're going to get fed or something like that. So that could have been the reason that they moved off. I don't know, but I just know that the rancher was getting pretty irritated with it. So.
And was there any sort of verbal alarm from the animals, like a lot of mooing or whatever? Anything unusual about how they reacted to these?
That I don't know. That I'm not for sure.
How many vehicles were described above the ranch? Was it usually just one shining a spotlight, or were there a series of them? Any reports on that?
That night alone, it was one. But on a lot of the other calls, not specifically ranchers, but even some of the folks that live right outside of town, right outside of Ord, that don't have animals and whatnot. They just live outside of town to get away from the lights, the city lights. They reported upwards of 50 sometimes of these things.
At one time.
Correct. Yep. I was not working this night, but one of the other deputies, the sheriff, my office manager, and I believe a state patrol trooper who was off duty was in the town of Arcadia, which would be to the southwest of Ord, and it's in Valley County. They were having, I believe, a baby shower, and upwards of 50 of these things were hovering around Arcadia, just doing weird stuff. It made no sense for why they were there and what they were doing. They just showed up and left. And the one deputy, he actually tracked them out of town, headed northbound, and he was again counting upwards of 45 to 50.
What was the fastest recorded speed of these things? Like, were you able to pace them with your vehicle?
Well, if you could pursue them, obviously, like I had mentioned, they would never let you get close enough to them. But there were times where a deputy, well, a sheriff had mentioned that he had his cruiser maxed out at about 120, and this thing was still moving away. He couldn't catch up to it.
During this 2-week period of these supposed drones, or however we want to classify them, the interactions or the harassment of the cattle, was that happening every night? There was a report of these drones, or was it only once a week? I'm just trying to understand what the frequency was of the cattle harassment.
No, at least in my county, it wasn't. There was not harassment every night. Now, the other counties that interacted with these things, I can't speak for them, so I don't know. But it was random in our county when a rancher would call in, whether directly to us or by 911, that, hey, these things are messing with my animals. What's being done about this? It wasn't every night with that.
Following the interactions, or during this 2-week period, did the sheriff's department or the local police departments make an effort, say like during the day, like if they saw like a U-Haul van pulled over to the side of the road, or any kind of vehicle that could have been a command and control vehicle, were there any traffic stops made in order to determine if they were possibly involved with these drones?
Yep. So we made quite a few stops on anything from semi-trailers that looked kind of different to FedEx trucks. Yeah, we made stops to try and get to the bottom of were these things being controlled by a vehicle on the ground, or where they were hiding at. We were doing everything we could to get to the bottom of it. Was
there any discovery of anything that was suspicious?
Not from stopping vehicles or semis or trailers or vans or anything like that. Nope, we never got anything out of it that would show that they were the ones that were controlling them.
I want to go back to the 911 calls. What would you say during that 2-week period were the number of 911 calls, and is that number unique for that time of day? I think, again, you said this happened all between 10 and midnight. Was the volume unusual? Were the calls unusual?
Well, we vary in our 911 calls on regular 911 calls. But this 2 weeks, it was every night. I mean, some nights it was 3 to 6. Some nights it was upwards of 12. And I would say over that 14 to 17 day window where it was every single night, I think it equated to about 44, 48 911 calls specifically for these drones.
That's a lot.
Yeah, considering that was just our county, and there were surrounding counties that were also receiving 911 calls too.
And from the surrounding counties, do you know if the various sheriffs from the surrounding counties were in communication regarding what was going on?
Specifically, one of the other sheriffs from a county near ours, I had some pretty good contact with, and he's got quite a few 911 calls and stories that he can tell, as well as a few of his deputies.
Were these encounters from this adjacent sheriff's department, did they sound like they were pretty much identical to the same sort of thing that your department was running into?
Correct. Especially the big ones that we would run into. They had a pretty astonishing interaction with a large one that to me is still mind-boggling, and I know it freaked him out.
Go into that if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so they were out on patrol, and he had 2 deputies with him, and they got a 911 call, and they went to go see what this thing was, and there it was. They flying near a house, so they went to pursue it. And as they were pursuing it down this gravel road, again, it paralleled the roads, as if, haha, I see you, but still I'm going to play cat and mouse with you. And they ended up following it back to the highway and getting on the highway and started to pursue it from the highway, and it paralleled the highway. And that was the time where he had mentioned to me that he was basically going top speed of his Suburban, which was his patrol vehicle. And I think he mentioned he had topped it out almost near 120, and they couldn't catch it, but it was there. And as they finally come to a stop, because it stopped, it had kind of veered off back towards the north, off the highway, and kind of hovered over a creek bed. And as they got out and went to go turn their spotlights on it to get a good look at it, it actually put a huge spotlight, if you want to call it, on them. And the sheriff had the 2 deputies with him, and they said it was just absolutely blinding. They had to look away. And the sheriff made the comment to me that when he looked to his left and his right, it looked like it was daylight out for about 200 to 300 yards in all directions. And it really freaked him out. And he did comment to me that this thing was huge, and it probably was the size of his Suburban. But it made no noise. It was quiet. And that spotlight, even if that's what it was, he said it was blinding. It just, what they went to do to spotlight it, to get a good view of what it was, it must have knew what was about to happen, because it spotlighted them right back, and it was overwhelming, he said.
And it wasn't, say, like did you get the impression that it was brighter than, say, like a night sun that you would see on a police helicopter?
Yeah, according to him, it lit the whole area up as if it was daylight. He could see all around him, and it was super, super bright. I would even say that it was probably way more brighter than anything on a helicopter.
Did anyone report any sort of negative health effects, or were there any reports of cattle becoming ill, say like a week after any of this happened?
Not within my county. We didn't have any people showing signs of, some type of exhaust burn or radiation or anything like that. No, we didn't have none of that, and I don't think anything from cattle either. Did
anyone from any of the federal agencies come to the county in person to investigate or to interact directly one-on-one with the county sheriff?
To my knowledge, no. He never mentioned anything like that. Neither was the other sheriff that I had just mentioned with his interaction. I don't think anybody ever showed up to his office. And I also want to make a comment with that night when that thing blinded them the way it did. He did call down to the larger airport, which would be out of Grand Island, and they do have some fairly large flights come in and out of there from Las Vegas or Arizona down in right around Phoenix. And he called down there, going, "Hey, are you guys picking anything up on your radar? And they told him no, but I believe their radar doesn't pick anything up below 3,000 feet. So could it have been just below their radar? Probably. But it still wasn't showing up on their radar. And it was, according to him, it was big and it could move.
During this 2-week period, what would you estimate to be the total number of drones viewed in the county?
Well, if you account for the few times that we were seeing upwards of 45 to 50 at one night in that 14 to 17 days, I'd say it was pretty close to 200.
The drones, the smaller drones, how did those look like? Did you see any propellers or anything of that nature?
Yeah, so the one night that I had mentioned where the one deputy had seen 45 to 50, my office manager, she actually got in her vehicle when these things were near Arcadia to go kind of, look at them, try and get a better look at them. And she had one of her kids with her in the back seat. And as they were leaving to go try and find these things, one actually just dropped down out of nowhere right in front of their windshield and stuck right with them as they were driving down the road, at 25, 30 miles an hour. And it just sat in front of their windshield, freaked her out. And then it just shot back up into the air. And she did make the comment that it did have some propellers on it, but it was a small one. It was not very big at all. And the way that it just sat right in front of her windshield, again, if this was a military operation, that's super, super unheard of for the military to be doing that, to, risk a civilian's life or to just be harassing a civilian in their vehicle like that. It just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense, but also what doesn't make any sense about this to me is, like, you've been hearing some former military folks that I think are doing it on behalf of the Pentagon, but for instance, the Langley drone incursions, you'll hear them say, oh, well, maybe it was a Chinese ship sitting off the coast and that's where these things were coming from, or a base or something like that. You don't have any of that near your county, correct? I mean, there's no.
The only thing we have around here, obviously, it's Nebraska. We're right in the middle of the United States. We do have some pretty decent sized lakes, but there ain't no huge cargo ships or aircraft carriers sitting out in Calamus Reservoir letting these things come off of them. I don't know where they came from. They would show up unannounced and they would leave unannounced. Any nights that we coordinated with other law enforcement to try and track which directions they would go, they'd just disappear.
The movement of these things, other than the one story where you were talking about where it clearly moved an incredible distance in a very short amount of time, did their movement seem fairly normal or close to what how a drone would perform? Were there any other observed instances of instantaneous acceleration or hypersonic speeds?
Well, I mean, if you go back to that large one I saw fly past the co-op tower, for a drone to cover that distance, again, probably close to 3/4 of a mile in 2 to 3 seconds with even no noise at all. I've never been around a drone that's capable of that, especially if it was as large as I was assuming it was, because it was a large light. And did I see an actual size? No. But for it to have that size of light on it, it would have to be bigger than, a little tiny drone. The weight alone of a light like that would have to be pretty big.
Were there any reports of, say, like a mothership or anything that the smaller drones were going in and out of?
Well, if you go back to that night that I had just mentioned about the large one flying over the co-op, there was a report coming out of Scotia of, I believe, 11 to 15 drones. And these were considered smaller from a few of the people that were calling it in. But the minute this large looking light flew past me at crazy speeds, these things disappeared from Scotia. Now, did they disappear in the direction of the larger one? I don't know, but they did disappear and there was nothing the rest of the night.
Okay.
So I don't know if they flew to a different county or where they went, but yeah, they disappeared. So could it have been a mothership? Sure. But as far as if I know that directly, no.
As a law enforcement professional, how does this concern you?
Well, when you can't figure something out, whether it's coming from a case like this or, a murder investigation, you want to get to the bottom of it because you want to bring, justice to your community. You want to give people a sense of relief. You never want to leave your community up in the air if you can. You want them to know that you're there to do your job, and that if it takes you 10 years to solve the case, you're going to continue to work on it. It just irritates me from a military standpoint because I couldn't figure out what it was, and I had to keep telling my community, hey, sorry, I don't know at this time. And I don't want them to think that I'm lying or that I'm trying to put them off, because that's absolutely not what we were doing. We were very concerned about this stuff from the standpoint of, if these things are a foreign nation, we're in trouble. From a tactical ground standpoint, if you look at what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, what's to say that if this is a drone and it is from China or Iran or Russia, and they just put 15 pounds of C4 on one of these drones and fly it into one of our local ethanol plants that has hundreds of pounds of chemicals, you're looking at a problem. You're looking at a real problem. Yes, it's not a nuclear plant, but those chemicals can ruin soil. They can, obviously kill a lot of people from explosions. You could stop transportation from trains that come in and out of here with thousands and thousands of pounds of feed that's going out throughout the country to feed other animals. You could have a real problem. And for the government, if you want to call it that, the military, the Pentagon, to just say, oh, we're looking into this, don't worry about it. That's not a good answer. It's not. And, if I take backlash from that, so be it. But I'm here for the community. I'm here for my country. So if I have to be the one that puts it out there more than some of the other folks are doing, such as yourself, you're doing what you're doing, which is awesome. That's why I reached out to you.
Thank you.
After I saw the interview with Mr. Mellon. So yeah, it's concerning because we could have a real problem if you just look at what's going on in Ukraine and Russia.
If you were given information by the Pentagon that said these things are not from here, and by what I mean by that is the Pentagon were to say, we don't know where they're from, we don't think they're from any human origin, and we're concerned about them, as a public law enforcement official, in your mind, would that be something that would be justifiable in not telling the public about it? Or do you think it's better to be truthful with the public, even if it's not good news?
Well, I think the public has a right to know. They do pay our salaries. That's why we're here, whether you're a cop or you're a soldier or an airman or a Pentagon official. The citizens of the United States are paying you. So whether it's hey, we don't know what it is, but it's not from here, that we do know. But as of right now, we can't tell you other things because it's a matter of national security. Then that's fine. But at least let us know something of what this is. So, we're not doing what we're doing right now, where it's, oh, we'll get back to you on that, or that's not a big deal, don't worry about it. That's not how, a democracy and a constitutional republic works.
Would it be fair to say, in your view, that the way that the government of the United States, in particular the Pentagon, the way that they are treating this and the information that they are given, or that they are giving local law enforcement, that the way that they are handling this is a direct threat to public safety?
Absolutely. Yep, it is. I mean, just going back to the side of it where I had mentioned, we at our level, we're not only worried about what these things were doing, interacting with our community, but we also were looking at, hey, what happens if 600 people of our local populace go out tonight at 10 o'clock at night and start driving around in their vehicles and are running stop signs trying to find these things? And now we have 12 additional car accidents that could be life-threatening accidents. That's the stuff that we also think about, not only just what are these things in the sky, but hey, the populace could also be harmed in this way from this action. So it shouldn't be where we're at with this right now. There's just too much going on in the world to just be this lackadaisical with it, whether it's coming from a different world dimension, China, it doesn't matter to me where it's from. Let's figure out what it is. And the people of the United States have a right to know.
I couldn't agree more with that. Since this has happened, does this topic ever come back up in conversation with locals, either be the civilians or your fellow law enforcement colleagues? Is it a topic of conversation?
I would say every week you're mentioning it every week. Even some of my local family members that live around here that are, up at the hospital or they work for the fire and EMS. Sometimes I'll have one of them come up to me, hey dude, whatever come about this, from 4 years ago? Did anything ever happen with this? And I'm still looking into it. And that side of it, I am not lying about. I'm actually being truthful. I'm still pursuing this. I'm doing it from the work standpoint of it as we sit here today, but I also take time out of my day, on a personal level to reach out to people or to interview new witnesses. So one of our local reporters here with the Ord Quiz, I just talked to her a couple days ago, and she was absolutely excited that I had reached out to you and, that we were in contact, because she's still wanting to know more. She's still looking into it. So yeah, it's still brought up quite a bit around here. There's no doubt about that.
Was there any video or photos? Were there any videos or photos recovered of these vehicles during any of your investigation?
Yeah. There was a photo. Well, there was a video and a couple photos sent to me one night by a local who, they're good people. They mind their own business. And they had called me and said, hey man, where you at? We got this thing out here. We're trying to have, if you want to call it a party. They had a bonfire going and stuff near their house. And yeah, this thing was flying above them, not more than maybe 30 feet. It was by itself. And the way he described it, it wasn't even a light. It was just like a solid blue object, but it was dark out. So that made it weird. Plus they had their fire going, but yet this thing was still showing like a blue color. And he sent me the video of that through text message. And when I started looking at it, I'm just going, that is weird. I mean, first off, the FAA, what's the regulations on that? And why is this thing at 30 feet flying over a guy's house when his wife and kids are outside playing? And you can even hear in the video his kid going, wow, look at that. What is that? And it kind of just slowly moves off and disappeared. It just was gone. But the way he described it, and even in the way the video was, it wasn't a light. It was just a solid blue object in the sky. It was so weird. And I actually did send that to the New York Times journalist, and she thought it was pretty weird too. So I think one of her exact texts to me was, drones don't move and operate like that. That's weird.
Do you still have those videos in your possession?
Not now, because I changed over to the police department instead of the sheriff's office, and any of that stuff was on the the cell phone with the sheriff's office. I did reach out to a deputy over there to see if it was still on the phone. And I assume when I had left the department, they either move everything to their database or put it somewhere else, but it was no longer on that phone because I no longer was in possession of that phone.
I understand that you went to the 911 call center to look for some of the records regarding this, and they weren't there. Is that correct?
A little bit of it is, but the amount of 911 calls that we had, I think I have it right here, actually. Yeah, so I have the call logs right here, and they obviously there was a lot more 911 calls. So I do have my regional dispatch still looking up more of that stuff, and I should have actual 911 recordings next week.
Fantastic. But I understand that some of the information looks like it was physically removed from the 911 call center. Is that correct?
Not at the regional level, but at my level, out of the dispatch at the sheriff's office, I couldn't find them. I don't know where they were at as far as where they got moved to. They could have been moved to a different location because things get moved around. So they could still be there. But when I searched for them, I couldn't find them.
Well, Chief Grooms, we really appreciate you coming on our show, sharing your story. This is clearly a threat to public safety. The way that the Pentagon and the federal government is handling this is a clear threat to public safety. But I must applaud your bravery and clearly putting country before self, service before self, in coming out and talking about this without fear of repercussions or the stigma. We need more law enforcement officials, people from the government like yourself that frankly just have the guts to come out and say this is wrong, the way that this is being handled. This is a threat to public safety in the way that it's being handled. And I can't thank you enough for going public with this. From how you're describing it, these clearly are not something that we understand. And as you mentioned, there are no military assets in the area. There are no nuclear assets in the area. From a tactical point of view, it makes absolutely no sense why 200 things appearing as drones, or not really appearing as drones, would be operating in that environment. I can't think of a reason why that would be happening.
Yes, especially, from, if you want to talk about top secret technology, what are they doing flying over small town Nebraska and interacting with the populace if you're wanting to keep it a secret? It just, like you said, it makes no sense. It just doesn't. And then from that national security standpoint, if it is one of our enemies, or it's from somewhere else, what are they doing here? Are they reconning our infrastructure to cause harm later down the road? Or are they just here trying to figure out what we are? I don't know, but somebody needs to get it figured out. And it seems like nobody wants to do anything about it other than people like yourself and, Grush and Mellon and all those guys. So, and Lou, he seems to be really having a train wreck of people wanting to bother him and cause him issues. And it just, that right there tells you that there's something to it and that we're not all seeing mass hysteria. I read an article that just irritated me with, it's just mass hysteria. And I'm like, no, it's not, bud. Why don't you do your job and come out here and interview some of us?
We are not living in a democracy when the federal government and elements of the federal government and security contractors working for our defense outfits are threatening the lives of people. That's that's not what our founding fathers intended for this nation, and frankly, it's an abomination of democracy that this is going on and has been going on for quite some time. It's really maddening. Well, Chief Grooms, again, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing any further information. And I don't know, hopefully we'll hear more of you, perhaps testifying in front of Congress or something of that nature, because I think our elected officials need to be fully aware of your experience and the experience of your law enforcement colleagues, because this clearly this isn't good. It really is not.
No.
Awesome.
No. And here we are 4 years later, and it's still, they're giving us the runaround.
Absolutely. Okay, well, Chief Grooms, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, your bravery, and your service to country.